The snow was falling sideways when the radio started using my dead supervisor's voice. It wasn't static.
It was him.
Calm, tired, and close, like he was standing right behind my shoulder.
He said, "Unit 14, turn around before the trees remember you."
There were 3 of us on that ridge that night. Myself, a seasonal ranger named Callie Mercer, and a volunteer searcher. The volunteer had no business being that far into the wilderness after dark. We were half a mile below Pine Creek Lake, following tracks that shouldn't have survived the storm. A missing hiker had been out there for 46 hours. Every instinct I had was telling me we weren't looking for him anymore. It felt like we were being brought somewhere. But the worst part wasn't the voice on the radio. The worst part was Callie answering it. She lifted her radio with one shaking hand, and she just pressed the button and said, "Copy, Dale." Dale had been dead for 8 winters. Before I say more, you gotta understand something about guys in my line of work. We don't tell stories like this because we want attention. We spend our lives learning how to make terrible things sound ordinary. We use clean words like exposure, disorientation, and misadventure. Say in a report and let families sleep, but they hide what the woods actually keep. This happened in December of 2003, back when I was working winter patrol. It was north of Yellowstone, up in the Absaroka-Beartooth Wilderness. If you've never been up there in winter, you can't really understand the silence. It isn't peaceful. It's complete. Snow loads the spruce boughs until they hang heavy, and the wind moves in these long, hollow breaths. Even your own thoughts start sounding way too loud. I was 32 back then, just seasonal law enforcement support. I was divorced, barely sleeping, and pretty proud that fear hadn't found a use for me yet. That was before we went looking for Aaron Kleiss. The missing guy was Aaron Kleiss, 27, out of Bozeman, and just experienced enough to get himself into real trouble. He headed out alone from Pine Creek with snowshoes and a disposable camera looking for sunrise shots. He never made it back. That wasn't exactly unusual on its own. People underestimate that backcountry all the time. They look at a map and see distance, but they don't see the elevation. In the dead of winter, the mountain just erases the whole idea of permission. What made Aaron's case different was the first set of tracks. They were found by a local guy named Earl Dunleavy, an old outfitter who volunteered when things got ugly. Earl knew snow the way other men knew faces, and he picked up Aaron's trail about 3 miles in. The prints moved uphill in a steady line through the timber. Then, without any sign of stopping, his left and right tracks just traded places. The stride kept moving forward, but the snowshoe impressions were reversed. It was like the guy kept walking, while his legs turned completely backward. Earl didn't radio that detail in. He told me later, standing quietly by his truck, holding a thermos he never even drank from. He told me he'd seen animal tracks fool good men before, but he'd never seen a man walk forward with his feet looking toward home. By the second day, the weather turned bad in a way that really changes your options. We had wind gusts over 50 and visibility was dropping like a curtain. Temperatures tanked below 0, so the county wanted to suspend the search until morning. But Aaron's girlfriend begged us to keep looking. That kind of begging still has a sound in my memory. It wasn't loud, and it wasn't dramatic. It was just this small, repeated breaking in her voice. So 3 of us went up for one final sweep before dark. Callie Mercer came along because she was the best tracker we had. She also had this personal anger at mountains taking people. Her own brother vanished a few years back, and she carried that like a second spine. The volunteer was Ben Holter. Big guy, former lineman, and way too confident in his own stamina.
He kept pushing us to go higher, swearing he heard someone whistle from above the lake.
Nobody else heard a thing. We really should have left him behind.
We started our trek at 3:10 in the afternoon.
We were pushing hard, trying to beat the sunset. But by 4:30, the light was already draining right out of the trees. The woods were getting darker, and a whole lot colder. The first weird thing I noticed was the flagging tape. Earlier teams had marked the route with orange tape on the branches. Just a simple visual to keep us on track if the snow filled in the prints. About 2 miles up, we spotted a strip of that bright orange tape tied around a dead pine. Then, just a little further up, we found another one. That didn't seem like a big deal at first. But then we hit a third piece of tape, and I realized all 3 were tied in the exact same knot. Same height on the tree, same torn edge on the plastic. Callie stopped dead under the third marker and just stared back downhill. Ben bumped into her, kind of annoyed, asking what the holdup was. She didn't even look at him. She pulled her glove off with her teeth and reached out to touch the freezing plastic. Her hand was shaking. She whispered, "This is mine." I asked her how she could possibly know it was hers. She showed me a tiny black ink smudge right near the torn corner. Her marker had leaked in her pack earlier that day and stained her roll. I tried to brush it off, telling her the wind probably just blew it up here. She just stared at the knot, then looked dead at me. "Wind doesn't tie knots," she said.
"We kept going anyway."
Because that's what you do when turning back means admitting something you really don't want to admit. The dark was pretty much absolute by then, just pressing in on our headlamps. Near the creek crossing, my radio started acting up. It wasn't normal static. It was this weird clicking and a low tone that sounded like breathing. I tried calling base twice, but got nothing. Suddenly, Ben stopped dead right near the edge of the creek. He tilted his head, listening hard toward the timber across the water. He pointed into the dark and whispered, "There." I strained my ears over the wind, and then I heard it too. Just a distinct whistle, cutting through the freezing air. 3 soft, human notes drifting down from somewhere uphill in the dark timber. I looked over at Callie, and her face had completely changed. It wasn't just fear I saw in her eyes, but this deep, horrifying recognition. She stared into the trees and whispered that whatever made that sound wasn't Aaron. Ben didn't listen to her warning and decided to call out anyway. He cupped his thick gloves around his mouth and yelled into the darkness. He shouted for the missing hiker to make noise if he could hear us. The whistle came again, farther away but much clearer this time. But then, from somewhere directly behind us, the exact same 3 notes answered back. Instantly, the entire forest went dead silent, like the mountain itself was holding its breath. There was no wind, no creek noise, and no trees creaking under the heavy snow. I told Ben to stay close to us and not wander off. He nodded quickly, his overconfidence completely gone as his face turned a sickly pale. We crossed the half-frozen creek one at a time, keeping our headlamps sweeping the tree line. On the far bank, we finally picked up Aaron's tracks again. They came out of the timber, circled a large boulder, and headed uphill in a normal, clean snowshoe pattern. But the relief of finding his trail vanished almost immediately. Right beside Aaron's snowshoe marks was a second set of tracks. They were bare feet, adult-sized and narrow, pressed deep into snow that would have frozen human skin in minutes. The bare footprints didn't come from anywhere. They just suddenly began right next to Aaron's trail. Callie crouched down in the powder to get a closer look. Her hand was visibly shaking as she gently swept the loose snow away from one of the prints. As she cleared the print, we could see that the toes were completely wrong. They weren't monstrous or clawed, which honestly would have been easier to process.
They were simply too long, pressed into the ice as if the joints bent in places they shouldn't. The bear prints paralleled Aaron's trail for about 20 yards up the slope. Then, chillingly, the bare feet moved directly into his snowshoe tracks. There was one bare print inside each oval, like someone had stepped exactly where he stepped after he passed. Or maybe before. The light was almost completely gone by then, swallowed up by the storm.
I looked at those impossible bare footprints and made the call.
We needed to turn around.
That was when my radio cracked open.
It wasn't static or a broken transmission.
It was Dale Rusk, my old supervisor.
The problem was, Dale died in a wreck 8 years ago.
I knew his voice perfectly, even the faint whistle in his teeth. He sounded calm, like he was right behind me. He said, "Unit 14, turn around before the trees remember you." Before I could even process it, Callie reached for her mic. Her eyes were totally glazed over. Sounding like she was half asleep, she just pressed the button and said, "Copy, Dale."
I lunged forward and grabbed her wrist, shoving the radio down.
She blinked hard, looking around like she just came up from underwater. She looked at me and asked what she just said.
Ben was staring at us, his face pale and slick with cold sweat.
He started backing away slowly into the snow.
He kept asking, "Who's Dale?" But neither of us answered him.
The heavy silence of the woods was suddenly broken. Then the trees started knocking. Just one heavy knock at first, like wood striking wood, echoing from deep in the timber to our left. A second knock answered from the right. Then a third one echoed from directly behind us. It wasn't random, and it definitely wasn't just branches cracking under the weight of the snow. The knocks kept going, moving in a wide, methodical circle around our position. Each strike was spaced perfectly apart. It felt like something unseen was out there, marking our shape in the dark. I snapped out of it and didn't wait to find out what was out there. I told them to move right now. Downhill, tight formation, and absolutely no stopping for anything. For about 10 minutes, we actually made decent time. We kept tight, moving straight downhill with our headlamps cutting through the snow. It should have been an easy hike out. We had the slope and our compass to guide us. But then the mountain started repeating itself. We passed this massive split spruce with a jagged lightning scar and a broken limb hanging like a hook. I saw it the first time, but I just brushed it off and kept us roon. We kept walking straight down the grade. My compass still pointed south, and the ground kept dropping right beneath our boots. There was no physical way we were walking in a circle, but the woods just felt completely wrong. 10 minutes later, we passed the exact same split spruce tree again. The same lightning scar, the same broken limb, the same orange tape. That's when my stomach just completely dropped out. The impossible was happening right in front of us. When we hit that tree for the third time, Callie finally stopped in her tracks. She stared at the scarred trunk, her face totally pale in the light. She whispered that we weren't circling. The forest was literally giving us the same place over and over. That was the moment Ben completely lost it. He shoved right past me, his eyes wild with panic, and just started screaming into the blizzard. He was shouting Aaron's name, then his wife's name. His voice was cracking with pure terror. I lunged forward and grabbed the strap of his backpack, yanking him back. I told him to shut up before he drew whatever was out there right to us. But Ben didn't even fight back. He just looked over my shoulder and froze solid. I turned around to see what he was staring at. About 30 yards away, a figure stood silently between two massive pines. Our headlamps didn't even land on it properly. The light just seemed to thin out and die before it reached the shape. It was the exact size of a man wearing Aaron's bright red winter jacket with the hood pulled all the way up. One of its arms hung way too low. The joints just looked completely wrong and unnatural standing there in the freezing dark. Ben let out this trembling breath and whispered Aaron's name into the silence. The figure didn't speak.
It didn't even step forward.
It just lifted its hand and made this slow, terrifying, beckoning gesture right at us. Callie made this awful sound, like the air got punched out of her. Her eyes went totally blank. Before I could even yell, she took a slow, trance-like step right toward it. I didn't even think, I just reacted. I grabbed the heavy strap on her pack and yanked her backward with everything I had. I pulled her down so hard, we both crashed into the deep powder. As we hit the ground, my radio cracked open again. But it wasn't Dale this time. It was Callie's voice coming through the speaker. She was sobbing, begging me not to let her go, saying she was still in the trees. The real Callie was lying right next to me in the snow. She curled into a tight ball, shaking uncontrollably. She pressed her thick gloves over her ears as hard as she could, trying to block out her own voice. I looked up just in time to see the figure in Aaron's jacket turn around. It started walking away from us, heading straight uphill into the blizzard. And despite the deep powder, its snowshoes didn't make a single sound. Before I could even get to my feet, Ben completely snapped. He tore free from me and just started running after it. He was crashing through the snowdrift, screaming that he could see Aaron right there. I had one hand holding Callie down, and my gloves were slick with ice. I couldn't stop him. And then Ben's yelling just stopped. It didn't fade away in the distance. It just ceased entirely. Callie and I stayed frozen in the snow, listening to the dead silence where his voice had been. The trees around us were still knocking in that wide circle. A minute later, a whistle came from somewhere behind us. 3 soft notes. The reality of what had just happened hit us both at once. Callie rolled over onto her hands and knees and just violently threw up into the snow. The mountain had taken him, and there was absolutely nothing we could do. I didn't go after him. That's the truth I have to live with. I had one living person left, and the darkness was tightening around us like a wire. I grabbed Callie by the arm and pulled her downhill. The forest fought us without even touching us. Branches just appeared at face height where there was open air a second ago. The snow would give way under one foot, then harden like concrete under the next. I just kept dragging her downhill. My headlamp started catching tracks in the powder that definitely weren't ours. Hundreds of them just crossing between the trees. I saw snowshoes, bare feet, old boot soles, even small prints that looked like kids, and every single one of them was moving uphill. At some point, Callie started talking, but it was her dead brother's voice. She wasn't imitating him. Her mouth moved, and a young man's voice just came out. She started rambling about a blue tarp, a broken stove, and some warm cave up above the timberline. I knew I had to break whatever hold that mountain had on her. I stopped, grabbed her by the shoulders, and slapped her. Hard. I didn't want to do it, but it was the only way to snap her out of that trance. Her own eyes finally came back, just full of hatred and absolute terror. She looked right at me, breathing heavy, and begged me to keep her here. She needed me to keep her grounded in reality, away from whatever was pulling her. So I did exactly that. As we kept pushing through the snow, I made her say ordinary things out loud. Her home address, her badge number, the name of her first dog. Just anything that belonged to the real world to keep her mind anchored. Then, through the dense trees, the trailhead lights finally appeared below us.
It was just 2 dim sodium bulbs glowing in the freezing fog.
But I swear to you, I have never seen anything more beautiful in my entire life.
We stumbled out of the tree line at exactly 7:46 p.m.
Search Command thought we'd only been gone for about 4.5 hours.
But I looked down at my watch, and it said we'd been gone for 11. Callie's hair was just thick with frost, and my cheek was bleeding from some branch I didn't even remember hitting. Both our radios were completely dead. The battery contacts inside mine were totally blackened, like they'd been burned from the inside out. They ended up finding Aaron Kleiss 3 days later. He was just sitting upright under a spruce tree, right near the main trail. His snowshoes were neatly crossed over his knees, but his boots and his socks were completely gone. The coroner called it hypothermia, which was true enough for the paperwork. But they found his disposable camera and developed the film. There were 24 exposures. The first 11 were just normal hiking pictures. Then they got to the 12th picture. It was a shot of that orange flagging tape tied around a dead pine. The next ones were the exact same tree. Just the same tree, over and over. Nobody could explain why he took so many pictures of that spot. But the final photo on the roll made no sense. In the last exposure, Aaron was standing right beside the tree, facing into the woods. The problem wasn't just that he was probably already dead when that picture was taken. It was what he was wearing. The jacket on his back wasn't his red shell. It was my Green Patrol parka. Ben Holter was never found. Officially, he was the second victim, but the county blamed me. Callie transferred out and wouldn't speak to investigators. Earl sold his horses and moved away. I heard he never slept indoors again. I stayed in the service for another 9 years. That's what shame does if you let it. It makes you stand in the same doorway, hoping the next missing person makes up for the one you left behind. I went back there once, years later, after I retired. It was late September, right before the first snow. The trail was dry, and families had been hiking all summer. In the daylight, the place didn't look hungry anymore. I hiked up until I found that massive split spruce. There was a piece of orange tape tied to a branch, sun-bleached white. Somebody had written on it. It had our names. And at the very bottom, Dale Rusk. I stood there waiting for the fear to make sense, but it never did. Right before I left, I heard a soft whistle from above. 3 notes. I walked down without looking back, hearing my own voice calling my name. That's why I never go north of Yellowstone after the first snow. Because some nights, when the house gets cold and the windows go black, I wake up to see wet, bare footprints melting across my bedroom floor. I've got this old map pinned up in my office. There's a hard line drawn right above the Yellowstone boundary. Soon as that first winter storm hits and the snow starts sticking, I won't cross it. That wilderness up there doesn't just take people, it keeps them.
Folks always think the cold is the real danger out there.
But for me, it's the silence the snow brings.
When the whole world goes quiet under that fresh white powder, I can still hear the trees knocking. I can still hear that whistle. I've got this heavy oak desk in my study. The bottom drawer stays locked all year round.
I keep the key hidden away from everything else.
It's a paranoid little ritual, sure. But it's the only way I can get any sleep. Inside that drawer is my old Ranger radio. I haven't put batteries in that thing for over a decade. The compartment is still scorched black. But sometimes, in the dead of winter, I swear I can hear static leaking through the wood. My house sits way out at the end of a dirt road.
On the worst nights, the temperature drops so fast the window panes actually groan.
The glass goes completely black, reflects nothing but the empty room.
That's when you really feel how alone you are.
It always starts the exact same way.
I'll be dead asleep, and this unnatural chill just floods the bedroom.
The air gets so cold, I can see my breath above the blankets.
I wake up shivering, and I know instantly I'm not alone. I just lie there, perfectly still, listening to the silence. My eyes always go straight to the bedroom door.
The hallway out there is just pitch black.
I just wait, heart hammering in my chest, waiting for something to move in the dark. Then the first wet mark appears on the hardwood floor, right inside the doorway. It's the shape of a bare foot, but the toes are too long. There's no sound, no creaking boards, just this freezing water melting onto the wood. A second footprint shows up, then a third, making this slow, deliberate trail across the room. They just glisten in the moonlight, moving right toward me with this terrifying, silent purpose. The whole room suddenly smells like pine needles and freezing fog. The trail of melting footprints stops right at the foot of my bed. I just stare into the empty dark right above them, knowing that thing from the mountain is standing right there. It never speaks. It just waits. A promise that the trees haven't forgotten me.